All right, and we're back. So over the break, I talked to a couple people about their project. And one other thing to reiterate about assignment number 1, if I was going to look at assignment number 1 for a second, and I'm going to go back and open up that project I created. So I'm going to go back to assignment 1, is make sure you follow what I've asked you to do. And I know some people, they came up with some really cool ideas, which I like, and some very simple ones. But they're very effective. But if you look at assignment 1, one of the things it tells you is, and where you may have a chance of losing mark is, there's 8 different outcomes. 8 different outcomes means that there's one positive outcome, but 7 other outcomes, and each of the outcomes is unique. All right, that means they're all different, right? That means you can't use the same kill scene every time. You can't say you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. You can't do that, right? You got to go like, okay, you died crossing a pit, and you might show a pit image, right? You died falling off, a wall. The next one is you died, trying to climb away from spiders. I'm just making this up, by the way. It doesn't have to be death. It also could be just fail. You fail, you fail, you fail, but you fail different ways, right? Make each of the outcomes at the end unique. If you make each of the outcomes the same, the seven deadly sins, they're all the same, right? Right? That's bad. It has to be different, right? Right? The eighth one is the positive one. You find your road to heaven here on the 8th outcome, right? And that's the only positive outcome you have. Sometimes what happens is, I've seen people where they've, in the past, where they cross over from node 4 to node 5 and then back. You can do that. That's okay, going back there. And also sometimes it's, you might go to node 7 or whatever. So notice I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're at node 7, and then before you go to outcome number 8, if you didn't pick up an item in node 3, even if you go to node 7, you can't go to outcome 8. It just won't allow you. It'll just take you to outcome 7. You'll just die or something. It'll maybe take you to another outcome. Maybe there'll be an 8th negative outcome, as an example. Because remember, this structure that I'm showing here is the minimum viable product, the lowest amount that you need to do. So some people they add additional places to go here in their path, right? So instead of doing 15 scenes, they might have 16 scenes with 8 negative outcomes and 1 positive outcome. And if you go to node 7, as an example, you can go to 2 negative outcomes. One that happens if you just choose the wrong one, and the other one that happens if you're missing an item. Okay, as an example, that happens too. So again, lots of flexibility here, and it's really around how to fit into the requirements that I've given you, right? And to create something that's kind of creative and speaks to you. It's kind of unique to you for your own. One thing I don't want to see is like blank with some writing. Blank, a little bit of writing. Blank, and then some writing. If all you do is give me blank and writing, it's pretty ugly, right? So you lose some marks in UI. That's what's going to happen. Whereas if you have some, like we saw before, like I gave you that example up online, and all I did was convert what I had, right? So if you look at my, maybe I have an example here somewhere. I can show you without downloading. So I came up with this, this stuff we did for, the dragon, and I called it the new dragon, and here it is. So if I go back into VS Code here and drag in the new dragon, right? Then what I did here was each of the scenes, I found I have a bunch of scenes here, just to review what I did. I have 3 scenes, right? You guys have to do 15, right? So my intro scene is the first scene, right? So if I click on intro, right? So if I double click on intro to show you what it is, it looks like this, right? So the scene is called intro. It extends the scene object, and then you have a couple of buttons that I've kind of put into the top of the scene that can take you in different directions. Okay, that's all it does. Now, if you notice, I have an intro image that happens right here. This is the button or the image that shows me the text and everything else, right? Now I made it an image. You could have split it off and given an image and some text separately if you wanted to. But if you're making it an image, and you have to load up the image anyway, might as well, type everything you're gonna have to. It's not like the user is gonna copy paste from the text, right? So you might as well make it nice, and you can use whatever creative text you want. I just use basic text that's legible, but you can make it so that they can use, you can make this thing look whatever you want. This is kind of a quick and dirty for me to kind of put something out for you guys. That's all it was. It took me an hour, maybe an hour for the whole thing to be revamped, right? So, and I did a couple of swaps. I just used a graphic program, Fireworks, to put everything together. So I have a button, and I have the left cave button and the right cave button, which I instantiate. And then what I do, depending on what I do, is I choose one of the buttons, and it basically changes the scene. So it moves around from the current scene. I change my scene to this one, and I call the change scene code the global change scene function in the state machine. Okay, this is only one way of doing it. There's other ways of doing it where instead of calling the change scene function, which is a global function, I can pull it in into my object here and encapsulate everything even better. This is just an easier way of doing it for people to understand, believe it or not, right? Even though it looks like it's complex, it's not. So when I run this thing, right, and again, I've got it up on Azure for you guys to take a look at, right? So here's my Azure, so COMP397, and it's called, if I'm not wrong, I think I called it, like I said, the new dragon. Here it is. All it is this, right, where you have your left cave and your right cave. Notice how long it takes to load up? That's because I haven't preloaded my stuff. I haven't preloaded anything yet. I haven't shown you that. We're going to change that today. We're going to show you preloading a little bit. So here's my cave of dragons, and again, I go left and right. As an example, all this text is just rasterized. So once I've created an image, this image here, I just created a piece of text in front of it inside my graphics program, and so it does one thing. So this is exactly what I showed you before, but instead of using, regular text inside of using Impress.js, I'm just making this whole thing an image. I click left, I go to the left cave, and it loads up, and now you're in the left cave, right? Now, normally what would happen is you want to make sure that this uses a preloader to do that. I'm going to show you the difference too. I'm going to modify the new Dragon to include a preloader right now. We're going to do that. I'm going to show you what the difference it does, what difference it makes. Okay, cool. So there's my left cave. I got killed. I'm done. Right? It says it gobbles you down with a bite. I start over. It takes me back to my intro scene, and I can go to the right, where the white dragon gives me his treasure. Right? Yay, sunlight, and it's beautiful blue. I win, right? So that's really it in a nutshell. I don't want you to give me blank. And by the way, the background here that I made, this gray background, I probably would have, if I had a little bit more time, and I didn't take too much time to do this, I probably would have changed this background, a little bit more as well to make it basically more blue. So if I'm in, when I hit the cave, the right cave, maybe I can change this background so it'll be a different color, or make it black, one of the two. Something that's neutral, like this, is fine as well. But what I didn't want to see is, please don't give me completely a blank canvas with some writing on it. That doesn't solve the problem for me. All right, because it's pretty basic, and you could have put a little bit more work into it. And I'm going to tell you that if you submit something like that, and when my response is going to be, I would have liked to see some pictures and some images to explain what's going on here. This is a game after all, right? Something like that you're going to get. Okay, so if you've done that, you still got time. You can throw some images together and make a little scene. It doesn't have to take too much, right? It doesn't have to be that beautiful, but it's better than losing points on something simple. Make sure everything, by the way, the other thing is, I wanted to ensure that the text was legible. I didn't want to make it so that it was too overpowering. Like, for example, that's why I created this transparency here. So I kind of had an image, and then I put this little box around it so I can read my text. Right? Because one of the biggest problems with video games is I can't read the text. So it's like your instruction screen, right? I can't read the instructions. Okay, it's not good. So let's fix that. So before I move on to the new stuff that we're going to do today, I have a problem, right? My problem is I'm not preloading anything. And the problem doesn't exist in my scene structure. My problem exists way back in my game.ts. So here's my game.ts. The game.ts is a sleek little file, right? Now it just has my canvas, my stage, my create.js ticker, everything else. But I want to have a piece up here before I get to my init function, right? I want to preload all my images, right? That's what I want to do. I already have in my my template, I already use, if you look at my index.html, I load in a bunch of little libraries. One of them is Preload JS. So I have the capability of doing that. Now, I'm going to have to warn you, right, that I may have to make some changes to the TypeScript definition file whenever I preload images, right? I always have some kind of funky image because they don't quite make it right. The library is slightly maligned, right? I'm just telling you this in advance. So I have to sometimes make a change. So it's not for the meek what I'm going to do. If you've never seen a TypeScript definition file, you're going to go, what did he do? Or why did he do that? Because it's not quite right. And I'll show you what the problem is. it'll run JavaScript-wise. It won't matter. TypeScript, it'll fail, right? So we'll see how that works. Let's take a look. So I want to get into this by doing one thing. Let's take a look at the Preload JS documentation. So I'm just going to use this little thing here to do that. So I'm going to go to, if I look at Preload JS, right? It'll take me right here to the Preload JS docs. If I click on docs for Preload JS, again, this is still part of the Create.js library. So there's like 4 libraries that make up Create.js, right? Easel, Tween, right? Sound.js, which we can use, and Preload. Those are the 4 things we can use, right? So let's look at the docs for Preload. It always gives you this getting started section. So notice that I have something called a queue, right, in my preloader. I'm going to bring that a bit bigger so you guys can see it in the back there. So let's kind of scroll over so you can see this. So you have this queue, right? Think about this as an asset, right? It's almost like an asset class or an asset object, right? I use my load queue to create a container for all my objects that I'm going to preload. That's what it is, really. Now here's where I get trouble. When I do this install sound plugin right here, when I do this, I always get some kind of weird error, even though it says it exactly like this on the page. When I use TypeScript and I plug in Create.js sound in here, it'll fail. Do not worry, we'll fix it, all right? It's just a TypeScript error. Remember, TypeScript is supposed to help us, not hinder us, right? So we use TypeScript to help us get code hinting. So when we make a large-scale application, it runs, right? And we can describe the classes, the external classes. Like, for example, there's a bunch of external classes here for our Preload.js, and we have a type definition file that we've downloaded that someone else made to describe what's going on with the classes. All we're going to do is modify that if we need to. All right, so what does this do? It says, I'm going to create an event handler that says on, so it's like add event listener. So when my queue loading is complete, I'm going to call this handle complete function. What's the handle complete function for our code? So I'm done preloading. What do I want to do next? Init. So our handle complete function is going to be init. That's what it's going to be. I'm going to preload first, and then I'm going to initialize. I'm also going to do something like this. Notice how in here, right, I have this queue load file that I'm going to do. And I can load a specific file, like for example, the sound file. This is one thing you can do. You can use the load file method to load a file up and load it into the queue, right? That's what it does. Or I can use a manifest. Here's my manifest right here, right? Where I create an object, right? Here's my object. Take a look at my object here. This is just an array, right, of paths, an array of objects, right? That's what it's really looking for. It's the load manifest piece is loading, right, an array of objects. Each object has 2 properties. One is an ID, and the other property is a source. The source is the path to the file. So that's good. That means I don't have to do that sourcing in my objects that I have. I can use all this up front. I want to do that for my buttons. I'm going to do that for my images. I'm going to do that for everything else, and I can do that for my sounds too. Right? I can load everything into the queue. It's just a big container. When the queue's finished loading, it's going to call my init function. So that's preloading, right? Now sometimes what happens is you're in that way, your game will take a few minutes or a few seconds to load up because maybe you're loading a bunch of stuff. So you're going to get a big blank screen. You're going to be like, what's going on? So what we can do is, and they show you how to do this, we can create something called like a loading bar. Right? So the loading bar basically loads, and as the queue gets closer and closer to the end, it shows 100%, and then it loads everything up. Or you can create a loading screen. Loading. So the first thing you do is, before preloading, you don't preload this one, this loading screen comes up, right? And then it sits there, loading, it says loading, right? Something like that. And then finally when loading is done, the screen comes down and you initialize, right? Different ways of doing it. We're going to not do that. We're just going to right now make it blank, and when it's done, it's going to load, it's going to run everything. Now, one thing you will notice is how slow it was for me to go from one scene to the other. But with preloading, I'm not going to load things into my scene. They're already loaded, right? All I have to do is use the images that I have in memory already. They're already cached. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, let's get to this and fix it. So I'm going to use this exact script right here, pretty much, right? Var, queue, blah, 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 right? And I'm going to do that. So I'm going to take this script and copy it. And I'm going to go back to my code, my Visual Studio code, and I need to create a new section in my game.ts file. Now again, some people will, you can also make this into its own class. And we'll talk about that later. Another refinement we'll make, right? But for now, what I want to do is I want to go into my scripts, into my core, into my game.ts, and before my init function, I'm going to create this loader, right? So I'm going to kind of put that in there. Notice how it errored out. Q on complete create.js sound. Shouldn't do that. There's no error here. But what the error that it gives us is argument of type of sound is not assignable to parameter of type any. So that's just a TypeScript issue, right? So again, right from the website, it doesn't work. That's a problem. The other thing that doesn't work is this. Sometimes when I load up a bitmap image, when I do this, the way we get our images back is we use this q.getResult, the getResult method. That basically we use the name of the object that we're getting from the queue. We're calling the object from the queue, and we're placing that object into the bitmap. Right? It basically creates a path. That's what it does. It creates a path for the object, but it's actually a blob because we've loaded up in our memory. We've loaded up a cache of this cached object, and we're just calling it in, making a copy of it, a local copy, and we're calling it into our object. So it has a bit of a problem doing that, but we're going to fix it. Okay, so let's fix this thing. First, I just copied it in here so we have it handy, so I don't have to flip back and forth, right? I need a new function, all right? So my new function, I'm going to call this function either preload is what I could call it, right? Or I could call it something like load handler or something like that. Let's just call it preload, lowercase, right? So my function is called preload. I want to do all this stuff pretty much in my function. I don't need a handle complete function. This is a separate function if you notice, right? This handle complete function is going to go away, but I'm going to keep it here because we may need to look at this create.js sound image thing or how we do this get result stuff in a second. Okay. But I want to definitely put this stuff in here, and I also want to separate up my manifest. This is my manifest right here. So I want to create a global object to hold this manifest. Now you may want to put this into a JSON file, right? Because it's just an array of objects, which is perfect for JSON, right? Perfect for something like a MongoDB database or something like that, a flat file, right? So let's do that. So we're going to say var, and we're going to call this thing data, right? It's just my data that I'm going to load in. We're going to preload this data, this stuff, right? You might want to call it asset data as a more descriptive name. So asset data, right? And we're going to make it equal to, for a second, this array, right? The array here. And what kind of array is it? It's an array of objects. Okay, let's see what TypeScript gives us for a second. Okay, I need to take this form, right? So the form looks like this. It's going to look like this. The first one is my image name and my path to the image. Well, I already kind of have that, right? My image name, if I look at my assets, is back button, right? And my path to my image is, if I'm sitting in my game.ts, I got to go up one, right, into my scripts, up another one into the root, back down one into my assets. So my path to the image is up one, up two, down into my assets, and then down into my images, and then in the image itself, I'm going to call the back button image. Let's call this back button .ping, right? By the way, if you want to follow along, you can always download my project, right? This the new Dragon project up online. So if you go to COMP397, the W2016, the new Dragon, you can always download that and follow along. So this my image ID for this particular path, all I'm doing is creating a friendly name for the path that I'm using, right, in my preloader. So my friendly name is going to be called back button, right? That makes sense. So here's my back button, right? So when I call back button, I'm going to use this format, q.getResult back button. And when I use that back button, I'm calling that image from my Q container, my asset container, if you will, right? Okay, you'll get it in a second. So I'm going to use a comma, and I'm going to copy this whole thing again. I'm going to do a bunch of those. This is where I'm kind of creating an array of objects, right? Now the objects have two properties, ID and source. Hey, if I have an ID and a source, couldn't I make this thing, this little object, instead of being anonymous, couldn't I make it into a class? The answer is yes, I can. Right now, we'll just do this first. All right. So this is the second one, and I got a bunch of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I got 9 images. Right. That's what I'm using here. So let's make 9 of these. So 2, and we'll just make it. We'll copy the whole thing, right? And I don't know why people call me on when I'm here, right? It just has to be. If they don't call me when I'm here, you know, something's not right. Right? All right, so again, so that's 3, and we'll copy all these three things a couple times more, right? So, 6 and 9. So there's 9. I don't need the last comma because it's one big array. Each array element, I'm just initializing this array. Notice if I pass over this, it says my asset is an ID. I've got a special object there's 2 properties. ID is string and source string. Those 2 things is what I need when I create my special class that I'm going to make later on, right? Okay, cool. So I've got this. Let's fill this in properly. So this I'm going to just do it by how it shows me here in Visual Studio Code. So intro cave is what the next one is called. I'm just going to take this one and just replace button. Intro cave. The next one is left cave. So left cave. Notice that I've kind of got it so that it's fairly generic. I'm using the exact same. I'm just calling the image name what it is, right? And the next one is left cave button. Right, because that's the button to go to my left cave, right? And putting in there. And then my next button, and I'll take the next button here, and load that over here. And here is my right cave, right? Does anyone not understand what I'm doing? Please put up your hand, because after this, if I continue, you really want to understand, right? So here, hold on a second. I'm just formatting my manifest. This is almost like my manifest. Think about it that way, right? My asset manifest of a bunch of, I'll call it asset data, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's really my asset manifest. It's just describing where I'm getting all my images and stuff. And this is the stuff that I'm going to load when I start. So start button. Here's my start button. I got extra buttons here that I don't need, but it's okay. And my start over button. Sure. Start over button. Okay, there we go. So I've described everything in here. All of my assets have been described in this array of objects, right? That's all I'm doing here. Cool. So I'm just following the pattern here, asset data. Now normally what I do is I create this load queue and I create a queue. Well, I'm going to call this assets. So instead of this, it's going to be a global object that's up here, right? So I have my canvas, my stage, my stats, my current scene, my scene, and up here probably underneath my stats. Which is, or even before that, before I even call my canvas, I want to have my assets. So var, right at the top, assets, right? And what am I making it? I'm making it of type create.js load queue. So create.js dot load queue. That's what the assets are, right? So in here, I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go assets. So you can see that, right? Assets. Right, is equal to a new create.js.loadQueue. That's all I'm saying, right? That's exactly what you see down here. This is replacing this line. Doop. Let's get rid of it. Now the next one is assets.install plugin create.js sound, which causes me an issue. We're going to fix it right now. So assets.install plugin, and then notice this is right from the website, create.js.sound, and then I get this error that apparently happens in TypeScript. Let's leave it alone for now. Let's type the rest, and then I'll get to the next piece. Next piece, I'm going to go assets dot, and normally you put add event listener, but remember the new way we do event listeners in Create.js is dot on, right? And then we sit there and type the type of event, right? The type of event is the complete. When it's complete, then we want to handle complete, or we want to go to the init function. There's my init function, okay? That's the event callback function. It's called init now, which we already have down here. That's all the stuff we did before, like the canvas and the stage and everything else. Before we get to the stage, before we even load up the canvas, we load up all of our objects. That's what we're doing here. We're preloading, okay? And we're going to pass in a reference to this, to the actual main document, okay? That's what we've done so far. Cool. So we've taken care of these 2 lines. Gone, all right? Now the next one, we're not going to use load file because that's not what I want to do. But I want to use this load manifest thing. That seems interesting to me. And how do I do that? Well, I can do one of these. I can say assets dot, load manifest, and we're going to put in the load manifest our asset data, right? That's what we're going to pass to the load manifest. Okay, we don't need this anymore. Okay, cool. So there's our asset data right here. Let's take a look. Right? Asset data is all this stuff. We're loading all of this stuff into my assets object. That's what I'm doing. Okay, cool. Now I got to be able to use those assets, right? So I need this assets.getResult methodology to do it, right? Now this is where we run into the problem. I don't need this thing for a second, but just remember assets.getResult, okay? As I change my code to preview. All right, let's go. Where do I use my assets? Well, I use my assets in a couple of places. One is in my game objects. So if I go to my game object and go to button, notice that I have this superclass that says in my button class, I go to assets images and actually go to the string. I don't want to do that anymore. This is wrong. I want to do assets.getResult and whatever the path string is. The path string would be the name of the asset. It would really be the asset name, right? So I can get rid of all this. This is in the button, and I'm going to do assets.getResult, right? And inside my getResult, I want to pass in the name of the asset, which is path string. Notice how I get an issue, right? Now, the reason why is because it gives me this big error. It says, I'm trying to put in a string, but it's really either HTML alignment, HTML canvas, HTML video element, string, or something else, right? Really, we're asking for a bunch of anything. So I'm going to change these to make it work. I need to do that or else my buttons will never work, right? Notice when I load my buttons in my scenes, I'm just going to go to my scenes for a second. If I go to my intro scene, when I load my button, here's my button, I just pass in left cave button. And left cave button is the name of the asset that I'm loading, right? I'm passing it to the button so it knows when to load that image for the button. That's all it's doing. But instead of loading the image directly now, it's going to take it from the cache. It's going to take it from this asset object that I've created. Okay, that's what it's going to do. So this is what I want it to do. So I don't have to change any of these so far. One thing I do need to change in my intro is this. I have my intro cave, right? So instead of my createjs.bitmap and I'm going to send in intro cave, I don't want to do that. I just want to send in my assets.getResult intro cave. So it'll look like this. Assets.getResults. And then inside there, intro cave in quotations, and I'm getting an error because it doesn't like when I do assets.getResult with a string, which is exactly how it's supposed to work. So again, this is just a TypeScript definition error. It's not an actual error. Okay, I'll fix it. You'll see how I fix this in a second. And it's good because then you can see how can you incorporate new JavaScript libraries that have nothing, they don't have a TypeScript definition, but you want to use TypeScript. How do you do that? I'm going to show you now. Okay, so I want to do that here, assets.getResult, and I'm just going to take the form here, and I'm going to go to the next one. So my intro cave is fixed. Let's go to my left cave. So I want to preload everything, especially here. These are the worst places right here, right? Here's my left cave, and I'm going to scroll over, and you can see that I'm going to just change that to, instead of ping, I don't need the ping, just the name of the cave, right? And make sure that I have enough brackets, because I'm missing a bracket there. There we go. Still an error, but it's not. It's going to go away. And then right cave, same thing. So I'm going to just collapse this one for a second, and to show you what I'm talking about. So I do this, right? And then I put another bracket on the other end, and just get rid of everything. Just naming the item that's inside my manifest, which is inside my asset data. That's all I'm doing here. Okay, cool. Well, I missed a bracket. Cool. Right. So notice that these errors exist, right? And I've got basically 5 errors now in my code. I want to fix it. So let's save everything. I haven't transpiled yet, by the way. So that's one thing I need to do. Let's go back to here and check to see if there's any other places that I need to change it in my game.ts file. So I need to do it here. This is one of the errors. My create.js sound is an error. And the other errors I'm getting in my create.js files anytime I use my scenes. So that's one of them. So there's 3 errors there, right? Where else am I getting these errors? Where am I getting these errors? And if I click on the errors itself, it shows me a list of errors. It says type of sound, not assignable parameter, because it's looking for something else. This object I'm looking for in my button.ts, my intro.ts, my left cave.ts, my right cave.ts. So those are my 5 errors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're all correctable. They're not really errors, is what I'm saying. They're just TypeScript definition library doesn't understand what I'm doing. Okay. So that means I have to go into my typings to make this work. So in my typings file, I have a TypeScript definition for a couple things. The preloader is one of the things I want to take care of. So if I go to preload.d.ts, take a look at what I got, right? I got all this stuff. And notice that what it's really trying to do is when I go to my bitmap, right? If I kind of search for bitmap, let's look at it. So bitmap, it's not there, right? Bitmap, look, bitmap. I don't have a bitmap here. I have a get result, right? Here's my get result. Look what it's returning. My assets.getResult, right? It returns an object. Yes, it does. But it can, in our case, we're returning the string. That's what it's listening for. My bitmap is actually listening for a string. So it's either an object or a string that I need. So that's what I'm going to put in as a return. So here on line 46 of my preload.j.d.ts file, I'm going to change the return type from just an object to an object or, which is one single pipe, a string. Let's show you. Or string. Now you can do that in the latest version of TypeScript. Object or string. I'm going to save that. When I go back to my, just to show you what that does, if I go back to my objects button, right, it's still there. Now I haven't really, transpiled, and I haven't saved everything. So first I want to save everything, save all. That's important. And now I want to transpile, right? So I want to try to do that transpilation first. One thing. Right? So I'm going to do my thing. It's going to do its dance, and it's changed. That's the first thing I want to do. So one thing is I want to change that up, and I want to start just dumping some of these files, because sometimes what happens is they get cached, these errors, and I want them to go away and come back. So then I go back to my button. So good, I'm getting this error, and it says type object is not assignable to type string. Okay, so type object not assignable to type string. Now I said it's either a button or a string, or an object or a string in my preload.d.ts file. Look, object or a string, and typically that should work, right? Because I've saved this file, right? As an example, I've made a change to my preload.d.ts file, and that's what the get result returns. It's not. It doesn't care about bitmap. The bitmap file. If I look at my my easel.js file, here's my easel.js.d.ts file. This is the type definition. If I look at bitmap, here's bitmap. It's a display object, right? And what it expects there is the following: either an image URL, or what should we call it, an HTML canvas, or an HTML video element, or a string. It doesn't say object, which is what it's returning, right? So there's two possibilities. I can do what I did, which is try and do this, and if that doesn't work, since it's returning an object, right? So I go back to that, go to my easel.d.ts file and change my type definition file to accept or an object, right? Let's see if that works. Again, all I'm trying to do is give me the right code hinting, so it gives me, it's one of those issues. Not any. I never want to put any if I can avoid it. If I put any, you know what I'm doing to TypeScript? I'm saying, see you later, TypeScript. I don't care about you, right? If I do this, it means like I don't want any code hinting, and so why am I using TypeScript? I want to avoid doing that as much as possible. I want to find the right combination of types. All right, so save. Let's go back and see if I still got those errors. I go back to my button. Error gone. So that took care of that. So that's one of the errors right there that I took care of. Okay, I still got some other ones. Let's take a look at the other ones I got. I got 3 errors. I got one of them is in my game.ts, in my intro.ts, and my leftcave.ts. I've got a couple of other errors there. So let me take a look at those things. Where are these errors? Well, it's not here anymore, right? And notice how they're going away. I haven't transpiled yet. Here's my leftcave.ts. It's not there. I'm left with one error. It's in my game.ts, and it's this other one, this install plugin. Here's my install plugin error, right? This is just an issue because it's expecting, it says type sound is not assignable to parameter of type any. Well, look what it's saying. It's not just type any. It's an object that returns any. This is actually a typo on their end. It should just say any, not an object that returns any, right? Okay. So let's go back to that and fix it. So I'm going to go back to the preload.t.ts file. Here it is. And I'm going to look for my install plugin now. So install plugin. And notice it says exactly that. It says my install plugin, right? It says it takes an object of type any. That's what it's listening for. An object, a plugin, which is an object of type any. That returns any. How about this? This is where I'm almost getting to the point where I'm saying, I'm giving, I'm flipping the bird here. I'm saying like, I don't care about you TypeScript. But really, it's almost like what they put in, right? So I'm kind of safe on this one. Now that I put that so I'm changing line 161 here on in my preload.d.ts. Okay. If I go back to my file, so my game.ts file, right, which is here, notice how I don't have any errors anymore. My errors are gone, right? Because now when I hover over this, my install plugin takes a plugin. That's what the result is of type any. So any kind of plugin, create.js, sound, something. It's a plugin. Now this can be dangerous, and I think what they've done, the creators, when they made this thing, is they've got to think about what this thing is. And if I was actually to look at what create.js sound is, the actual library, I would have to look at my create.js sound, right, or my install plugin in the actual library, the actual, not in the typings, but in the lib folder, which, you don't want to touch these. These are just minified files, So I could look in here in my Preload.js. There's actually unminified versions of these files from a development perspective that I could look into to try and find out what these libraries mean. But for now, let's just leave it as simple as doing this. Okay, so we fixed our problem, right? And I want to transpile one more time just to make sure that everything is good. And when I transpile, I want to test it locally. Before we couldn't test it locally because those files didn't exist in the path. But now that I'm preloading, I should be able to test locally as well, which is your problem. You had a problem. You had to kind of put it up to, or someone said I have to make. Or was it Albert? Albert said he has to put a bunch of stuff up on Azure a bunch of times. There's like 50 different commits because he couldn't test locally. Testing locally is really important. So this is going to fix that problem. One more thing I forgot to do. My index.html calls the init function right now. Take a look. On load, call init. That can't be anymore. On load, call preload. In my index.html, right? Because my index.html is going to call the right function. If I just call init, I just bypass my preloader. I don't want to do that, right? So if I go back to my scripts core game.ts, just to show you that, this function, this preload function, is going to load first now, and then it's going to load the init function. Okay, let's transpile. Like I said, save all, transpile everything, and then when it's done, I want to test it locally. So let's do that. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to open in Finder. In your case, it's Windows Explorer, right? And here it is, the new Dragon. So this is like version 2. And I'm going to double-click on this, right? And I'm refresh, right? And now it's going to say, well, Tom, you said you can load everything. What's going on? Well, let's take a look at what I got now. It's a different error. If I inspect, if I go to console, it says, and this is where I can test locally. It says I got an HTML HTTP request, cannot load file, right? Because it's a security problem in Chrome. That's a different error than we had before, right? So this is where I told you guys before when I said it to you. You need to use some kind of small little server, like HTTP server, to do it for you locally to test. So let's do that instead of just double clicking. Okay, so how do I do that? So I'm going to go back into my code, right click down here, open in terminal, right? Or in your case, command prompt. I'm just close this tab, and in here I'm going to just, in my folder, I'm going to type http:/server. There it is. So now it's serving it up on port 8080, right? Localhost 8080. So now if I go to localhost 8080, I'm going to see my project. Let's try this out. Still local. I haven't put it up on Azure yet. I can test it locally now, right? So let's just use this one. So localhost 8080, and then now I'm good. Now look at the difference in terms of load. Watch. Left cave, right cave, start over, right? No load time. Why? It's been preloaded, right? All the images are already there. The first time I load my project, it takes a second for me to load everything because I load all my images at once. But I'm not loading every time. That's what I was doing before, and it was giving me that lag, okay? So that stuff is done now, which is really cool. All right, now that I know that it works locally, I can send it remotely. I can send it to Azure to make sure it works up there, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to, and by the way, if you were going to look at this project, it's different than it was before. Just to test that this is a new project and somehow it's not cached, I can right-click and look at Inspect. And I can see my console has no errors now. There's no errors in the console. It is localhost, so I'm not on Azure to make this work, so I can see this stuff, right? This is important. If I look at my sources, this is neat. If I look at my scripts, I can see that in my core script, which is my game.js file, I have this preloading of asset data right here. And that makes me comfortable knowing that my files are different. So this is version 2. I've added a preloader. I'm going to fix my preloader before we pause for a break again, before I stop the video. All right, so let's do that first. So I'm going to go back to my terminal, stop running my little server, my mini server, clear the screen, and I'll say this: git add dot, git commit -m. These are the steps I need to take. And I'll say added preload method, or function actually is what it is, right? And I'll say git push origin master. Once I do that, it's going to push up to GitHub. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes, right? And then when I go look at it up online, right, on Azure, so let's look it up on Azure. So I'm going to say comp, and if I look at the new Dragon, that's it on Azure, and I press refresh, it's there. Now see the difference? It took a second for it to load the first time, but now if I go to my left cave and my right and start over on my right cave, it's instant. It's there, right? Because it's already been preloaded. I don't have to load it every time. That's the key about preloading. Now, especially if I have a lot of assets. What if I have not just 3 assets or 5 assets or 9 the way I have? What if I have 30, 50, 100, 1,000, right? It's going to take some time. And to illustrate that a little bit more carefully, I have this, I think I've shown you guys this before. I did a project, Starbase 12. I did a Starbase 12 project a couple years ago for this course, right? And it looks like this. If I go to starbase12.heroku.com, you can try this out as well if you want to check it out. Here's what happens when I go to Starbase 12. I get a little loading bar. Watch. This is actually preloading my assets. That's how many assets I have for this one. It's a lot more intensive, right? Now this is on Heroku, so it's going to take its time. And when it gets to 100%, otherwise I would see a blank screen, right? Remember? Because I'm just using a blank screen. The other one only had 9 assets. This has lots of assets, right? So now when it gets to 100%, right? Once it gets to 100%, I'm good. I can play the game, and it gives me a start button. So I won't give the start button until I'm 100% loaded. So I click on start, right? I got my instruction screen, right? With a couple of things like my mission, right? This is just an image, and I stole the sound from Star Trek. Okay, if I play the game.
Entering sector 0.1.
So I got my little custom cursor, right? This guy's firing at me, and then notice I have different shield positions that maintain from level to level, right? So it's more of a strategy game, right? The guy turns towards me. The one thing he doesn't do is he doesn't really follow me around. If I was going to go to the next version, I make my ship follow around, right? I get a bit of a particle effect for explosions as opposed to animation, right? If I die, oh, wait, turn. Oh. I can reload my stuff, right? Sound is getting crazy. Oh no, see, I can't let that happen. If he kills my starbase, I'm in trouble. Right, so kill him. Okay. Uh-oh. Now there's 2 of them, right?
sector 0.6.
Fix the shield. Right, it's okay. In trouble, right? I can still dock with them though if I want to dock with them, and I'm not going to. I'm going to die now. Okay? Particle effects. Sad music. Right? Now this took me about 2 weeks to write, right? So it took me a little bit of time, right? So again, this could be like something like a final project for you guys if someone made something like this, right? One thing I did different, like that I would probably not like if someone else did now, because I've changed my requirements since I did this, right? Is it's one scene. It's one scene, and every level, what happens is it resets the scene and makes it look like it's more than one scene. So it's a continuous kind of defense of the starbase kind of idea. That's what the game is, right? Defend the starbase, right? Or I can play again.
Entering sector 0.
That's my voice, by the way. And I used Audacity, right? Which is again that free app. If you're going to go to Audacity, for those people who haven't downloaded yet, Audacity is a free app you can download for your system where you can manipulate the sound that you can make on your own. You can use any kind of instrument. You can use your voice. You can any kind of sounds. You can modify the sounds. And I just kind of recorded my own voice and modified the sound, right? Now, that wasn't a demonstration of, I didn't want to show you this game because, hey, I made the game. It's not about that. I wanted to show you about the preloading stuff because there's a lot of little assets that I had to load up all at once. Here's a trick, though. I want to tell you this, right? One thing you're going to do is when we make sprites, because we're going to talk about sprites and animation, there's going to be a point where we're going to do some animation. You can also preload the animation, all the frames of your animation. You can preload all that stuff. That's good. But I probably want to do that by using a sprite sheet where I can combine a bunch of different assets onto one sprite sheet. You know why? That's even faster than loading individual files. Instead of me loading a bunch of different files, I load one sprite sheet one time. I only access the operating system one time, and now I've got all my data. And then all I do is point to different parts of that file, right, to show in my game. Okay. All right, so we've updated that and it works. I want to make one more change before we pause this one. I don't like this. See this? I mean, I don't like that at all, right? And the reason why, first of all, I forgot a semicolon too. That's bad. But the reason why I don't like this is because this has no typing. I'm using TypeScript, so I want to create a type for this. What would the type be? Well, it would be an asset. That's what it would be part of the asset class, and it would be one single asset that I'm loading. Well, that means that my assets, this is my assets, it makes sense because each asset is going to be loaded in my assets container, right? That makes sense. So how do I make an asset class? Let's do that. So I'm going to go into my objects. Let's make a new class together so you see this for the first time again, right? It's not going to be a core class. It's not my core library. It's going to be in my objects folder, right? I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a new file that I'm going to call asset.ts. Okay, I want you guys to help me. I need to make a module. How do I make a module? What is the first thing I do? Come on, guys, I need your help. Huh? Export is part of it, but I need to make a module, right? So I need some keywords. Module, right? Come on, guys. Wake up a little bit. All right. Module. I need to name it something. I'm going to put it in my objects module, so it's going to be called objects because it's going to join, it's going to add to my objects namespace. That's what I'm doing here. All right, and then I need to put some curly braces. This is the first piece I need. Okay, cool. Get rid of this. The next piece I need to do is load up or include a class. So I'm going to make my unique little class. It's going to be a very small class I'm going to make, right? I'm going to need to use the export statement because I want to export this class so it's available on the main namespace, right? Or the global namespace. Okay, and it's going to be class, and my class that I'm going to be exporting is called asset, capital A. Always classes by convention, capital, right? My asset class, what type of class is this? Is it going to be extending another object? No, I don't have another object to extend. I'm making a new one, so that's good. So I can still use a constructor, right? And my constructor for this is going to take, it's going to be two two objects for this thing. I need two things, two properties for my object, right? I need my ID and I need my source. Those are the two things. So inside, before my constructor, I'm going to put those in. One of them is going to be called, it's going to be a public for now, because that's what it is, ID, right? And which is going to be of type string, right? And I need a public source, right? Which is of type string. Those are the two things that are part of my asset class. My constructor is going to take an ID and a string. If I want to use my constructor, I won't have to in this case. You'll see. I want to take my ID and source, and then I want to attach them to my ID and source and my private ID and source. Or my local variables, if you will, my class variables. So I'm going to say ID is a string if I want to use my constructor, and my source is also a string. And when I use my constructor, I'm just going to say this.id is equal to ID, and this.source is equal to source. So I'm just going to basically create a container for my ID, my two strings. Right, that's what it is. So I'm making a special data type that has two strings. That's it. I'm done. There's no methods attached to this class. It's just a new data type that has two strings. Okay? Let's try this out. So these are my public instance variables here. By the way, we can modify this class later on, variables, Tom. And this is my constructor. Right? Here it is, my constructor. And this is the asset class, right? Which I'm just defining, right? Now, am I good? Can I just go like this now? What's the next step to make a module? I'm going to remind you guys, right? So I made my module, use the export keyword, blah, blah. What's the next step? I need to attach my module somehow. What do I attach this thing? What's my main thing that I attach all my modules to? My index.html. If I don't attach my module to my index.html, it will not be attached to my files. That's the main manifest for my entire game, my index.html. So I got to go back to my index.html, and I got to decide a place to add this module. It's probably going to be somewhere over here, because now let me ask this question: what does it depend on? It's probably going to be one of the first modules I add in, right? So probably before label or button or scene, it's going to be this one. Let's copy the kind of the way it looks, the format, and paste, and just change my label to asset. Right, that's the second piece. Okay, save my index.html. Yay! Third piece, I need to go into my core library, my core folder, and go into my reference.ts, and above my label, I want to add in a reference to help my compiler find my new asset. I need to make it a reference in my reference.ts file. Right? So that needs to be added in there. So I've added it in, and I've made my connections. I've connected to my index.html. I've exposed the class in my module. I've done all the pieces I need. One last thing I need to do is save everything and transpile. So if I don't do that, then there's no JavaScript, right? So let's just transpile. It's done. And if I go and look at my objects folder now, I have asset.js. This is what the asset.js looks like, right? This is the actual asset class here, right? And if you notice, it's this.id and this.source. Okay, let's test it. So now I'm going to go into game.ts again. And notice that I have asset data, and I don't have a type. But now I can make a type. I can go asset data, : asset. And it's going to be objects.asset. And if I look at it, it says, objects.asset, it has two options for I have two objects. I have an ID and I have a source, and it says, oh man, I have a problem, right? Why? Because I'm not just getting one object, it's an array of these types of objects. So it has to be an asset array. So I made objects, which are assets, and this asset data is actually an array of assets. That's what it is. Now, if I look over this, it just tells me that, right? So that's the data type. Nothing's changed here. I've just typed this object. And I did it as an exercise, not because I had to, right? To show you how to make a little class, okay? Because we haven't had a chance to do that explicitly that way. Okay, cool. It doesn't bugger up this. It doesn't change anything here. So if I use my asset data, it's passing in an array of objects, just like I did before, right? Nothing different there. But now my asset objects are defined. And I also have the option to create these objects individually, right? As opposed to here like this. I can say, I'm going to make a new back button object called back button if I want to. And it's going to be equal to a new objects.asset, and I pass in two things, the back button ID and the source. I can do that as well. That gives me the power to read a JSON file and load up everything into my asset array, right, as an example. Or I can use MongoDB or something else to load it up. And I've created a model, which is really what I've done, the asset model that I can load in my data. If I didn't have that model, there's no place to load up and it wouldn't work properly. All right, and I couldn't do any kind of typing. Here, I have the ability to do that. Cool. Now, it shouldn't make any changes, but we did make a change. So I always recommend when you make a change like this, we're going to save all, right? And we're going to test this thing locally. So I'm going to open this up back in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m. And we're going to say, well, what did I change? I added my asset class. That's what I did as an object, right? Cool. I'm not going to push it yet. All I've done is I've just made a commit. Now I'm going to do http-server so I can test my server out. And in my local space, which is here, I'm going to refresh. And now you see that it's working, right? Now, to make sure that this isn't a joke or whatever, again, I'm going to look at my inspect because sometimes it caches and we don't get the right result. I'm going to go to my console, no errors, this is good. And in my sources, I can look at my sources, and now I can see that my asset data from my index.html is different. Let's take a look at my scripts core, my game.js, and let's take a look. So my game.js doesn't show anything different because my game.js is the same, right? But maybe my game.ts will, and it does. It shows me that my asset data is of type objects asset, which means I've loaded in my file properly again. This is good, okay? So I know what's being passed on. Now I know that this works because I can go to my right and my start over and my left. I've tested it locally. I can push remotely. So I'm going to go stop this, clear the screen, and push remotely. And now it's going to go up to Azure, push up to Azure so that it has everything that it works. It's going to take a few seconds to do that. Testing that, I'm going to go back to the Azure website, right? And I'm going to refresh it. So it's going to load up again for the first time. Good. And I'm going to see if it's the right thing by inspecting it. I'm going to go back into my console or my sources, sorry, and look at my scripts and look at my core in my game.ts script. I don't see anything, but my game.js, you can't tell because my game.ts online, unfortunately, the way it works is it doesn't show it remotely. It only shows it locally. Even if I refresh, it won't show it. But I'm confident that if there was a problem because I've refreshed, I mean, it still does my preloading and everything else, but now I'm using an asset class in order for me to house everything. Okay, this is a great place to stop, guys. Let's take a 5-minute break, and I'm going to, my next example, we're going to start into the slot machine. Remember, over the next couple of days, we're going to be talking about slot machine, right? How do I do all that? And how do I set up my project, right?